everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our GitHub Action from Zero to Expert series. In the previous episode, we learned the fundamentals of YAML, the language used to write GitHub Action workflows. If you haven't watched that episode yet, I highly recommend checking it out before continuing because everything we covered today built on those YAML concepts. Today, we are going to answer one of the most important questions you will have when working with GitHub Actions. What exactly is inside a workflow file? By the end of this lesson, you will understand every major component of a GitHub Action workflow, and you will be able to read and understand almost any workflow you find on GitHub. Let's get started. A workflow is simply a YAML file that contains instructions telling GitHub what tasks to perform automatically. These workflow files are stored inside a special directory in your repository, the .github/workflows directory. Every workflow that you create must be placed inside this folder. Think of a workflow as an automated assistant that waits for an event to happen and then performs a series of tasks without requiring any manual intervention. These tasks can include building your application, running automated tests, deploying your application, sending notifications, calling external API, creating releases, managing issues or pull requests, and much more. This flexibility is exactly why GitHub calls them workflows instead of simply CI/CD pipelines. A workflow can automate almost anything. Let's talk now about the main components of a workflow. Every GitHub Action workflow is built using 4 major components. Let's examine each one. The first component is the name. This gives your workflow a descriptive title. For example, name : my first workflow. Although the name is optional, it's highly recommended because it appears inside the GitHub Action tab, making it much easier to identify your workflows. Always choose meaningful names instead of naming your workflow 1. Use something like build application, deploy website, run unit tests. Clear names make your repository much easier to maintain. The second component is the trigger. The trigger tells GitHub when the workflow should start. Triggers are defined using the on keyword. For instance here, on : next line, indentation, push. This means whenever someone pushes code to the repository, GitHub automatically starts this workflow. GitHub supports many different triggers. Some of the most common ones include push events, pull requests, schedule execution, manual execution, release creation, issue creation, tag creation, and many more. We will explore each of these triggers in detail throughout this series. After defining the trigger comes the jobs section. A workflow can contain one job or multiple jobs. For example, jobs : and release our job. Think of each job as an independent task. One job might build your application, another could run automated tests, another could deploy your project. By default, multiple jobs run in parallel. That means GitHub executes them simultaneously to save time. Later in this course, we will learn how to make one job wait to another using job dependencies. The component 4 is steps. Inside every job, we define steps. Steps are the individual actions that the job performs. Each step executes either a command, a script, or a reusable GitHub action. For example, you can have steps : next line indentation, run, and we define the job building application. Every step runs in sequence. When one step finishes successfully, GitHub moves to the next one. If one step fails, the job usually stops immediately. Now, let's put everything together. A basic workflow looks like this: name, 2-line, on, 2-line, jobs on the same indentation. Then, When we move on the next line, we have the jobs one. We define the runs on option, the runs on component, and the steps. After that, we have the jobs two. We define the runs on and the steps. So, reading from top to bottom. First, we give the workflow a name, then we define when it should run. Next, we specify one or more jobs. Inside each job, we define the machine that should execute it. Finally, we list the individual steps that performs the work. Once you understand this structure, reading GitHub action workflows becomes much easier. Let's see this complete example. Name my first workflow. On column, next line, indentation push. Next line, jobs, column. Next line, indentation. We set up our first job. My build job runs on Ubuntu layers. We define the steps. We define the steps. Column, -run, equal building application. Then we have the next jobs. My deploy job runs on Ubuntu layers. Steps, column, next line, -run, equal deploying application. Let's understand what's happening here. Our workflow is called my first workflow. It runs every time someone pushes code to the repository. The workflow contains two separate jobs. The first job simulates building the application. The second job simulates deploying the application. Since there are no dependencies between them, GitHub executes both jobs in parallel. In a real-world production environment, however, we usually want to deploy only after the application has been successfully built and tested. Fortunately, GitHub Action allows us to define these dependencies. We will cover that in the next episode. Before we finish, let's quickly recap today's lesson. A GitHub Action workflow consists of a name to identify the workflow, a trigger using the on keyword that tells GitHub when to execute it, one or more jobs that define the major task, steps inside each job that perform the actual work. Once you understand these 4 building blocks, you have mastered the foundation of every GitHub Action workflow. Everything we will learn in future episodes built on this concept. Congratulations! You now understand the anatomy of a GitHub Actions workflow. In the next episode, you will explore one of the most powerful features of GitHub Actions, job dependencies, where you will learn how to make one job wait until another job has completed successfully before it begins. This is an essential concept for building professional CI/CD pipelines. If you enjoyed this lesson, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification so you never miss the next episode in this GitHub Action series. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next lesson.